I was asked recently the best way to remove a lawn to start a new garden. Now, this is a question obviously that comes up a lot, and I used to know somebody who told me, he says, you see, I did this beautiful area. I put all this manure on there and I grew all these beautiful watermelons. And I was like, well, how'd you get rid of the grass? And he said, well, I use Roundup. Just spray the whole area, and then when it dies, you just throw manure on top of it and till it under, and then you plant. Whew! One of the big benefits of backyard gardening is we can avoid all the poisons of big ag. You know, I mean, why would you want to use the same sort of poisons and methods that are used on these big farms when we can do things in our backyard that are organic, methods that have been around for 99% of mankind's history, as compared to this last little bit where we seem to solve everything through a combination of spending money and spraying chemicals. So today I'm going to share with you 5 ways to eliminate grass or weeds or a piece of lawn and start a new garden. And all of these are organic methods, and we're going to weigh some of the pros and cons, and you can figure out which works best for you. And I'll be right back after the fountain. Our first method is not one that you may have tried before. There is a tool called a broadfork, and if you've watched my videos for any period of time, you've probably seen me using a broadfork. There is one variety of broadfork that I use, and it is the Meadow Creature broadfork, because that's the indestructible broadfork. It's made out of steel. It's like a piece of terrifying farming equipment. I mean, it looks like something you could tie to the front of your car and just plow through zombies with. It has these beautiful sharp tines, and it works its way into the ground, and it's pretty easy to use, and it really allows you to loosen the ground quickly and get rid of weeds. Now, this works really, really well in sandy soil or looser, loamy soil. This is very hard to do in clay. We have done it, but we have to wait for it to rain and to soften the ground. If we tried to do it in the dry season, with the clay, it was so hard, it was like trying to till up a asphalt driveway. It just did not want to work. So the broadfork is a tool that we use as kind of an off-grid tilling. Now, I like the idea of modern tools and how easy they make things sometimes, but I also really like to have hand tools as a backup. And if you are doing a small space, using a broadfork is a really easy and effective way to till. Not as easy as using power equipment, but it's easy enough to make it worthwhile on a small space. Now, if you had to do an acre or so, it starts to get much harder. And if you have hard soil, it's very much harder. And if you don't have a broad fork, you can use a regular garden fork. We saw that done in the Caribbean quite a bit, and we did some of that ourselves on a small scale. But you have to have a garden fork that is strong enough to actually stick into the ground and bend back and forth and loosen up the roots of the grass, and then you pull it out in clumps and you chuck them. And often modern garden forks are just junk, and they bend when you do that. Our second method for removing the grass and getting started works over a period of time. This is putting down a tarp. In a recent video, we showed the woven landscape fabric that we are using in a portion of our garden to eliminate the weeds. We also use it to suppress cover crops, to create big nursery areas where you can just spread it across a piece of grass, pin it to the ground, and then put your pots on top of it, and you have an instant nursery area. And most weeds do not come through it. The only weed that we've had that goes right through it is the very invasive pain in the neck Kogan grass. And if you have Kogan grass, this entire video is just moot. You're going to have to just burn your entire yard with a flamethrower and then move. But if you have a tarp and you lay it down, particularly when it's hot outside, and you suppress the weeds or the grass, the exclusion of light really does a number on them. They just die underneath it, plus the heat coming down from above. I like the woven nursery fabric because the water passes through it And so it actually causes the seeds beneath to germinate. So the water can pass through it and cause, when it rains, causes more rot, and it gets them to sprout and then die and sprout and then die. And they give up quicker, I think, than just using a regular tarp. So it actually allows water through. Now, if you're going to use a regular tarp to kill off the grass, wet the area really, really well first, and then cover it with a tarp, and then you'll trap the moisture in it. And some people use silage tarps. Somebody on one of my recent videos commented that Haas Tools sells good quality silage tarps, so that might be an option, or you might be able to scavenge one from somewhere. Other people have told me that they've used billboard tarps. You can use the tarps that you buy from Home Depot, but I've noticed a lot of the modern blue tarps and silver tarps that you use for covering things, they just don't seem to be high quality anymore. And what we don't want is tons of plastic in the garden and all those little bits of broken microplastics spread through it. That's nasty. So we use this woven 10-year nursery fabric, we cover the ground with it, and then after it's killed everything off, we remove it and we take it out of our garden space because we don't want to leave plastic. But for the period of time that we use it, we can use it again and again and again and again, and it's not deteriorating. So that is another option, but you do have to plan ahead. So if it's summer or fall and you tarp a big area, you'll be all ready for spring. It also preserves all that organic matter which rots down into the ground. I have pulled them up and had all kinds of worms and beetles and other life underneath them. And it's just an easy method, but it's a method that doesn't allow you to get your garden in this weekend. It means planning ahead. And for some of us, that's not the easiest. So let's go on to method 3, where there's no planning whatsoever. Method 3 is using a tiller. Now this has become super controversial. It wasn't controversial 30 years ago, but now you've got people saying, oh, you should never till the ground. It kills bacteria and fungi and it destroys soil life and it destroys soil structure and it's awful and it's bad and you should never, ever, ever do it. However, there are times to till, particularly if you're hungry, right? So if you wanted to build a no-till garden system big enough to feed your entire family, that's going to take gathering all kinds of materials. That's going to take having all your ducks in a row. That's going to mean that you have to have access to materials, for example. So if you can borrow a tiller and you can till a big area up and you can put in row gardens, that may not be ideal. It may not be the best for the soil, but it may be the best for getting food on the table right away. And when we have had big areas that need to get cleared quickly, and we need to get food in the ground right away, like particularly during the pandemic when everybody was freaking out, we were like, you know what? We don't know what's coming next. So we borrowed a neighbor's tractor and we tilled a big area and we put in a bunch of single rows. We got a lot of food out of it very quickly. So you got to keep that in mind too, right? You want to move towards perfection, but you don't necessarily get there right away. There is a process of sanctification that takes place over time as you defeat the larger sins and you work your way towards the smaller sins, and hopefully eventually your conscience has become so attuned that you are restraining your tongue and restraining your life on a daily basis. But I think I was talking about gardening. So back to gardening. If you are working towards this goal of excellence and towards no-till, if you were to till first and put in single row gardens, and then you can take a wheel hoe or a regular hoe and you can keep the weeds out of there, and then you could grow a cover crop, or you tilled under a cover crop, or whatever. It's possible to use a tiller. Now, one of the downsides of a tiller, other than destroying entire cultures, is that when you till, you also turn up a whole bunch of weed seeds, and as soon as it rains, a ton of little weeds germinate. So you have to be ready to get rid of those. And you also, if you're tilling up a lawn, you may be tilling under a bunch of rhizomes of grass, which may then turn around and become a nightmare and the grass just all replants itself. I have an area that I tilled in the spring because I was planning on putting in some garden beds, but I didn't get any mulch on top of it, and I didn't get a cover crop on top of it, and the entire area turned back into grass again. Well, that was it for that. So if you're going to till, you're going to have to till and get your crops in and then keep them weeded. But it does allow you to get a big space done in a short period of time. And if you don't want to own a tiller, that's great. I didn't own a tiller for many years. I own one right now because I got one for really cheap and I've used it for some projects. Most of the time I don't use it. But you can go and rent one usually if you live anywhere near the city, or perhaps you have a friend or a neighbor with a tiller or a tractor. And I would not turn down the chance to get a big area tilled if you are going to put food in it. And then you can manage it no-till after that if you want to. It's up to you. I mean, the main goal should be to get food out of your garden, and you're still going to be doing better than big ag. And you can work your way up to perfection over time, or as close as you can possibly get on this mortal coil. Our fourth method allows you to eliminate weeds, build soil, and compost all at the same time. This is one of my very favorite methods. This is called lasagna gardening, or sheet mulching, or deep mulching, or there's different names for it. But basically, you're going to mow the grass, wet the area down, and then throw down a layer of cardboard or old newspapers. If you have a friend that's a hoarder who still has newspapers, and you can take some from her house, and it doesn't have too many cat droppings in them, you can just go and spread them out and use them as a weed block. You'll see it in like every article on lasagna gardening. You know, use old newspapers. I'm like, who has newspaper anymore? Almost nobody. I wish I could compost the internet, but that's a different story as well. So you need to lay down some sort of weed block. Now, we have replaced the cardboard weed block in the past by using broad leaves from bananas and heliconias and other tropical plants. We've also used palm fronds, particularly the big cabbage palm leaves that spread out on the ground. But for those of you in more temperate climates, you're probably going to be stuck with cardboard. Now, sometimes you can get away with simply mulching very deeply and killing the grass beneath, but that does not always work. It depends on the grass. If you're dealing with something like Bermuda grass, you really want that weed block layer beneath. And plants that have persistent rhizomes that are capable of reshooting and coming up through that mulch, that can be a big problem. Whereas I found if I have a really pernicious weedy grass like Bermuda and I put down 2 layers of cardboard, wet it, cover it with 6 inches or more of mulching material, it will eliminate it over time. But when you're making that layer on top, if you want to do it lasagna style, like Patricia Lanza teaches in her book, Lasagna Gardening, she mixes whatever organic materials she can get. So we used rotten straw and fall leaves. We used kitchen scraps. We used lots of coffee grounds. Somebody from the coffee shop gave me buckets and buckets and buckets of grounds, so we just spread it in there. And so the idea is you have a whole bunch of different materials that are all in there. You might have, manure, you might have paper shreds, whatever you've got, if it's not too toxic and if you feel comfortable using it, just make a big layer of it in your sheet composting, cold composting on top of the ground, and then you make little pockets right into that, punch a little hole in the cardboard underneath the pocket, put in a few handfuls of compost or soil, plant transplants right into that bed of mulch. And those little pockets are enough for those roots to grow into and not rob nitrogen from if you have a lot of wood chips or something around it. And then the roots can go down through into the native soil, but the weeds rarely come up through those pockets. That works really well. It's an instant garden space. Now, on the downside, you have to gather a ton of materials. You got to be out there, ripping tape off of the cardboard. You have to have access to unsprayed hay, unsprayed mulch materials, right? This can be a very big problem if you end up with an herbicide or a pesticide in your materials. Wood chips are usually safe, but you might not be able to get a big load of wood chips dumped at your property. These are all limiting factors on lasagna gardening, which make it very useful in some conditions, but sometimes you just can't manage it. But it does kill the grass really well. It builds soil beautifully, and the soil beneath, the worms move in and the beetles move in, and all that soil life starts moving, and it darkens the dirt beneath, and it gets absolutely beautiful and loamy and useful. So lasagna gardening is number 4, and that is a beautiful and also quick method of getting a garden in, like right away. Our 5th and final method of getting rid of weeds or grass organically is not one that many backyard gardeners are probably familiar with, and that is using a suppressive cover crop. So let's say you have a lawn, and let's say you want to turn that lawn into actually, that's what this whole video is about. So you already have a lawn you want to turn into a garden. So what you do is you mow that lawn, and you maybe hack some holes in it like this. You make little stations 2 or 3 feet apart. You plant seeds of something that is super vigorous, but is only going to live 1 season. Like velvet beans. Most people in the United States don't even know what velvet beans are. Mucuna pruriens. Down in South America, this is used regularly as a suppressive cover crop in maize fields. So in areas where they would normally be slashing and burning and the soil gets weaker and weaker and weaker over time, they've found that by using a velvet bean cover crop, they can suppress all the weeds, they can fix a lot of nitrogen into the soil, so that's another benefit. It's a legume, so it adds nitrogen to the soil, but it also is capable of suppressing some of the worst weeds in the world. It is a thick, crazy, rampant green growth that just totally covers the ground, makes a lot of biomass, and then when it freezes, they die. Or you slash them down on the ground, use them as mulch, and put transplants right into all those beans. Now, lab beans are another one that can be used. You can make an area, just till an area and cover it with fava beans, winter peas, wheat, barley, other things like that. And then the next season you can slash it all down and grow on it. But some of the most aggressive cover crops are the best way to get rid of grass. There's another tropical legume, Cajanus cajun, the pigeon pea, which is a shrubby legume. When we were in the Caribbean, the farmers would chop holes through, they would just slash the grass down, they would chop holes in it about this big, and they would plant a few kernels of corn and a couple of pigeon peas. The corn would grow up and they would slash the grass down around the corn once or twice. They didn't even try removing all of the grass. They just kept it low and let the corn grow up. Then after they harvested the corn, they would cut the corn down, and the pigeon peas that were growing around the base of the corn, and which were somewhat suppressed by the growth of the corn, would then grow into big shrubs which shaded the area, suppressed the growth underneath. And then in a year or two after they harvested pigeon peas, they would often cut that area down and they would plant something else. But now they had a nice clean area where it had been suppressed and nitrogen had been fixed, plus they got tons of fodder material that they could feed to their animals. So this is another option. One more option you can use, which is not a legume and not a small grain, is to actually knock holes in the ground and plant sweet potato slips. I use sweet potatoes as a ground cover. Sweet potato slips are good at this. Another one that's really good at this is pumpkin vines. If you can get some big mounds, like composty mounds, and just let pumpkins run from them, plant them, let the pumpkins run over the entire area, they will suppress a lot of the grass and weeds beneath them. It's not as fail-safe as tarping the area or lasagna gardening or maybe even tilling it, but you are adding mass, you're adding a lot of roots to the ground, and it's really good if you're doing something like an orchard situation where you don't have to have a perfectly clean and perfect seed bed. It gets most of the weeds suppressed, you get a crop out of the area hopefully, and you have a nice new planting area afterwards. So those are my 5 main methods of eliminating grass, controlling weeds organically without spraying, and I'm going to give you one more as a bonus. This may not work for some of you guys in the city, so I wouldn't call it one of my top 5. I know some of you deal with HOAs or restrictive city codes, etc. But you can also use a chicken tractor and fence an area in and just feed your chickens there for a period of time and let them tear everything out of the ground and manure the ground, and then you can plant on top of that. You can do the same with pigs, and if you want to learn more about how you can do the same thing with pigs, check out Flannel Farms' video. I will put a link to that below. Flannel Farms, my brother Brian, he did a video on how he used his pigs as tillers, and then he has oversown the area with a cover crop of peas. Looking forward to spring when he's going to put many more vegetables in there. So you can till with pigs, you can till with chickens. That would be your kind of number 6 bonus. But anybody can use the top 5. I hope that's useful to you. If you want to learn more about weed control, my friend John Moody wrote this book, Winning the War on Weeds. It's very useful. I was honored to have a chance to help him publish it. Winning the War on Weeds by John Moody. Highly recommend it. He is running a beautiful little organic no-till farm in Kentucky, and good book. Highly recommend it. I will also put a link to the weed block that we use below this video because that's useful as well. And any comments you have, any questions about cover crops or anything like that, leave them in the comments below. I try to respond to everybody as best as I can. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, may your thumbs always be green.
Discover the beauty and efficiency behind grocery row gardening. Create a backyard where fruits, herbs, vegetables, and flowers all grow together within proper spacing. In grocery row gardening, you'll find the tools and systems you need to keep your family fed.
Buried my rabbit beneath the cherry tree one fine afternoon. Someday I know that we'll meet again on a fruit salad spoon. Laid my hamster to rest last night beneath the pumpkin vine. Someday I know that we'll meet again in a Thanksgiving pie.
You want this stick? What's the... There's all these sticks in the woods, and she's just gonna go get that one.